So my name's Caroline. I'm from Little Atoms. This is number 8 in a series of talks about Path to Utopia. Today's one is Utopian Lab. So we'll be looking at health and utopia and sort of ideal ways of living in that sense. We're going to start off by talking about Stem Cell Hotel, so this is Ines' project, and then we'll talk about Twin Tails with Claire Stevens, and then Future and Plate with Abby and Sophie. And this is also done in conjunction with This Is Tomorrow. So if we could begin by talking about Stem Cell Hotel.
Yeah, so the Stem Cell Hotel project started with the visit of Andy to our lab. So basically, we showed him a bit the lab, we showed him some cells under the microscope, and then actually it was in our Stem Cell Hotel. So we have in the lab something called a Stem Cell Hotel, which is a place where scientists that have great stem cells decide to and want to use the stem cells for, clinical trials for cell therapy. Then they can come around, be hosted by us, use our facilities to develop a bit more their research, so that then this can go as more data for clinical data before they go to some clinical trials. So he really liked the concept of a stem cell hotel, so I said, well, let's brainstorm about it. And so I went home and I was talking with my friend Flavia, she's an exhibition designer, and started to talk about this stem cell hotel concept. How can we develop it? And then think about a human being, and then what does a human being really need to live? What do you think they would need to survive and live? Oxygen, food. Water. Warmth. Love. They need to divide, they need to multiply, the humankind needs to continue. So, and actually, the stem cells need exactly the same. They need to have food, nutrients, water, they need to be warm, they need to divide so that the colony of cells divide. So the idea was that we will create a human hotel where you would have the images of stem cells growing under the microscope, and you will see how cells divide, how they migrate, how they work to close wounds, how they exactly how they form their colonies. And so basically, the concept turned a bit around that, creating our stem cell hotel that lives inside this safety cabinet that later on maybe we'll show in some images. That actually is where the cells live in our lab. That's where you change the medium so that they have fresh food and they are clean, and then they are happy to divide and continue reproducing. So it was born a bit around this concept.
Okay, I think we've got a video to show about the project that will give people a better idea.
Biological world is fascinating to look at, and it's even more fascinating to understand. And it's this curiosity to understand how cells in our body works that inspires me.
I'm fascinated by the infinite possibilities of stem cells. I feel we're only just scratching the surface of the field, and it's an exciting time to be a scientist.
Cells divide to make tissues, but a stem cell can also self-renew, making copies of itself. Within this choice lies its power.
Stem cells have a lot of potential. In a flask they can be pushed to differentiate into another cell type, like a nerve cell for example, but they can also do as they please. The way a stem cell interacts with its environment will determine whether it self-renews or turns into a particular type of cell. Stem cells are great for regenerative medicine because of their potential to form different types of tissue that are needed by the human body.
For me, it's all about the search for the unknown, the excitement of seeing something for the first time and trying to understand the mechanism behind it.
I hope that stem cell research will move forwards from understanding diseases to being able to treat diseases. With the advancement of cutting-edge technologies, I think this is a realistic goal.
I will never forget the first time I looked through a microscope and I could see with my own eyes that tissues are built of individual cells. It's a very basic concept, but one that has captivated me ever since.
Tissues and organs work hard to support our body throughout our lives. Unfortunately, time will always take its toll. It's my hope that by researching the rejuvenating power of stem cells, we can one day slow the clock on ageing.
My hope for stem cell research is that we'll be able to use stem cells to help people, to regenerate tissues and to improve our quality of life. Is this a utopian ideal? I think it was, but now it's a dream coming true. So basically, our pieces in the installation started with this video where you kind of see the hopes and dreams and what inspires the scientists to pursue on stem cell research. Then you have this vision of how the stem cell will live in their stem cell hotel and how can we push them to differentiate, regenerate organs and kind of help, I don't know, if you have a wound in your skin, how are they so important to close that wound? And then we'll have a space where it will be a more participative installation where we'll ask the public to write their hopes and dreams for stem cell research and leave us this little message in a bottle that they will incubate, and this idea will develop. It goes back to the lab. So the ideas, the dreams and hopes from the public are now back in the lab in a daily basis, and you as researchers know sometimes it's quite frustrating to not have the data you want, and then maybe get inspired by these ideas to keep going and even think about new projects. So it will be like a round, circular approach that we wanted to create.
Amazing. I was wondering if you can tell me and the audience a little bit about your kind of background in stem cell research and how you...
So I graduated on biology and I did my studies mostly in development biology and stem cell biology. So when I finished my PhD I was focusing more on skin stem cells and hair follicle stem cells, but then I wanted to kind of understand when the stem cell becomes a cancer stem cell. So and develops tumors. So that's when I joined the lab of Fiona Watt here at King's College to have this bridge between understand how stem cell works to understand when stem cells doesn't work or becomes a cancer stem cell, what's the mechanism behind it, so that then we can kind of fight this possible development of a tumor.
Fantastic. And then going on to the next project, so Twin Tails, Dr. Claire Steeves, you're filling in somewhat for someone today.
So I'm here instead of Tim Spector, but I'm his clinical senior lecturer, and I'm also in the Department of Twin Research, and I'm the Deputy Director for Clinical Work. And what our exhibit here with Twin Tails really showcased our subject matter, which not stem cells, but individual people who happen to be twins. And so I think what it started was with some beautiful pictures done by they're Indigo Demeter, of twins. And then together with Andy, sort of developed an installation which challenges the public to think about how twins are different from each other and how twins are similar to each other, and to sort of consider their individuality, and also how these individuals then talked in audio recordings about their experience as a twin, what they liked about being a twin, what they didn't like, and also about their experience about being part of medical research. And so think about, Path to Utopia. What's amazing about our research is this collaboration between members of the public, twins, and scientists coming together. You hear as well audio about Tim, how he built the Department of Twin Research and developed this sort of huge set of data that we have now, coming from these individuals who've really given so much of their lives over the years and contribute to science. So I suppose that's the start of the installation.
Yeah, I was wondering if we can have a look at a series of pictures from the exhibition, and if you want to kind of explain what they're about.
So obviously in twin research, we look at the sort of interaction between genes and environment, and our particular focus is on aging research, and I'm a geriatrician by background, I'm a clinician. And so I'm interested in how people become frail as they get older. And so here you've got a number of older and younger twins, twin pairs, so you see the differences between the twins, but you also see the similarities, and you see sort of their courage, and they're talking about what it means to be a twin. Obviously, these individuals here are genetically identical, or at least their DNA is identical. But they're actually very different in terms of how they are as people. And that's reflected in the biology that we see. They are different in terms of, from a whole range of omics that we study in them. They're different in terms of epigenetic markers. They're different in terms of the microbiome that lives within their gut. They're different in terms of their health outcomes as well.
Yeah, just going through them.
But they're also fabulous people and fabulous to have as a resource, like your stem cells, really.
So they are volunteers for your research. And you were able to follow them for several years, the same?
So we started collecting data with twins in 1992. So some of the individuals have been over 20 years with us. And it doesn't. This whole collaboration between the public and research participants and scientists isn't just restricted to twins. In Guy's and St Thomas's, we have a bioresource of patients and staff members who give their biological samples to a big bioresource, so that we can, if there's a particular interest from, for example, in your stem cell research, if you come up with a particular gene that looks really interesting, you can then call up participants that may have that genotype and do science on individuals which have been collected in this big bioresource. So it's a big collaboration between public and scientists.
Yeah, I was wondering if you can kind of briefly expand on that and the utopian aspect of having to work together in that process.
Yeah, so I think that the scientists obviously, gain from being able to have access to this amazing resource, but the individuals have ability to learn about themselves, and also this ability to sort of either give to the whole community. So in the case of our twins, they're healthy individuals who, maybe sacrificing samples or, talking about their lives. Obviously in the clinical setting, patients may have a bit more of an incentive to, give their samples in order to study their own disease a bit more. So I think it is a very utopian concept, really, and very exciting. And the more we can build it, the more we can extend it, the more we're going to be able to get out of it.
Great. And then the third and final project that's a part of the exhibition, Future on a Plate.
Yeah, so me and Aspen, this is Aspen and I'm Sophie, and we run Future Farm Lab together, which aims to put farmers at the centre of the food chain by connecting them with consumers, retailers and technology.
And the connection with King's and the Utopia Lab was my research is growing meat in the lab, a little bit different to most of the kind of life science and health aspects of the talk. But it's part of tissue engineering for food, so that's where we've come from. But actually, the title Utopia is we've been looking at this technology and how can it be more, public facing in the wider context. What does this sort of technology mean for us in our future? So that's where our future on a plate came from.
Yeah, we've very much looked at Utopia through Utopia of our food, which then feeds back hopefully into health of individuals. But yeah, like Aspen said, less of a direct health sciences approach and more of a through the medium of food. I think we've got some slides to talk through. Cool, so I'll kick off.
This is where it all began.
Yeah, so what we put on at Somerset House was a photography exhibition which looked at the evolution basically of food from what we picked initially was a full English breakfast. It's something that everyone recognises, probably something that most people enjoy. But we wanted to kind of get to the story behind this delicious looking plate. So no matter how nice it is, this food has quite a sorry tale behind it. So the bread that we all know and eat mainly on a daily basis comes from food that's grown in monocultures. More often than not, loads of chemicals are applied, fertilisers which leak into streams, kill fishes and pollute our waterways. We've then got vegetables which are again grown with loads of chemicals that pollute our waterways and are also bred to grow so quickly that they don't have the chance to absorb nutrients from the soil, so they benefit us less as a nutritious capacity. The meat on this plate is also more likely than not come from animals with really low welfare standards, and also I think the tale behind this whole plate is that a lot of waste will have gone into the production of this food. So this was the start of our Utopia journey, and what we wanted to do was to explore how we can replace each of the food group components on this plate with something a bit more utopic. So something that paints a bit of a better picture and means that we can continue to eat food and have a relationship with food and enjoy it without just exhausting the world's resources to the extent where we're going to have some kind of horrible solution to our food problem. So Aspen's going to talk through how we can replace these components in a more utopic way.
We also have painted quite a bad picture of this plate.
It might not be that bad.
Yeah, and we did try and source everything as well as possible, and that actually took us on a journey. Trying to find the best place to get bacon, and what does that mean for society as a whole? Where can we get eggs from, and what does free range mean, and all these things that it was kind of a journey for us. The beans were organic, but they came from China. Does that make it any better? And this plate is always static. It never changes with the seasons. It never changes with the years. And that's another thing we learned. We were like, what can we do to move on from that? And I think the next picture, hopefully, about 80% of all the emissions that come from our food come from the way it's grown. So we need to really, really look at how it's grown and not just where it's travelling from. And then we had a look at the future of food as well as our current situation.
Yeah, so what Aspen's described is the way we can fix our food system now. So how can we take little everyday steps to improve the way we eat our food? So if we go on to the next slide. What this portrays is potentially what the future of food could be if we don't take the chance we have now to eat more sustainably and source more sustainably. And what this is a picture of, I'm sure many of you have no idea, is a powder called Huel. And what Huel is the dubbed future of food and food revolution. And so this is a powder that contains all the nutrients that you need to survive. You're supposed to eat this between 3 and 5 times a day, mixed with water in a protein shaker. And on top of this, you need no food, no alcohol, no extra source of sugar, nothing. And this is supposedly utopic. So Huel paint this as a very utopic picture because it's 100% vegan, it's supposedly 100% sustainable, and its production produces no waste. Having said that, we've looked into Huel and done a bit of research, and they won't tell us where any of their ingredients come from or how they're made. So
even use Twitter.
Yeah.
Even use Twitter to try and shame them.
So it might well be sustainable and it might well be waste-free, but we don't know for sure. And if we have this kind of big solution that cures everything all in one go and gives us like food in a can, or worse than food in a can, food in a powder, it just shows that we completely lose the connection with our food altogether, and we have no way of knowing where it comes from or why it came from there.
Also, I was going to add that we're very good at seeing food as a product. We always see like Huel as a solution because that product is a solution, whereas we kind of need to look at food as a system. It's an intricate web of people, places, plants and animals, regardless of what you're eating. So we kind of buy into these new like vegan and vegetarian and protein shakes and stuff, but we're buying into a product where we need to invest in a better system.
Yeah, and so I think the main thing about us for Huel is that although it's supposedly a utopic solution, we think this is actually quite a dystopic picture.
And then the last picture I think we've got is cellular agriculture. So this is like the weird thing that's kind of close to my heart. And cellular agriculture can be painted as two things. Something super, super dystopic, as in like, oh my goodness, it's come to this, we're growing meat in the lab. Or something really utopic, like, oh, we don't have to think about the way we consume, we can just continue as we are and grow meat in the lab. We're actually, like, I view it as sort of a meeting in the middle. There is the risk that we can just do this and then never really think about where it comes from, but actually maybe it can be moved towards like agroecological and ecosystem sort of farming. Maybe we can start to close kind of loops within the food chain now. So we use collagen to grow muscle tissue in. Maybe we can start using that, which is actually a waste in agriculture, it's not utilised very much at all, to remake meat. Maybe it can add to a more diverse and resilient sort of food chain. So it's also a way to look at the industrial farming system and totally de-incentivise it. So if you make a product that is cost competitive and basically going to get rid of industrial farm meat in this case, you then look at other ways of rebuilding the food system. So maybe this is not a sort of utopic or dystopic picture, maybe it's just a realistic one.
I think the hope is that maybe something like cellular agriculture is something that we can combine with more ethical sourcing and more local, localized ways of getting our food. And that's our hope initially, is that we can combine something like cellular agriculture with something like individual changes we can all make, rather than have to rely on something like Huel, which is a global solution and quite a scary one in some ways.
Yeah, I think food is something that we've kind of all got a relationship with and are very familiar with it. But I wanted to open up the conversation talking about the kind of more, alien side of it and the hard scientific aspect of it. And I was wondering if you could kind of expand on communicating quite complex ideas with the public in Stem Cell Hotel.
I think the best way to start is to either try to explain your project to your mom, or try to explain it to a bunch of 7-year-old kids and see until how do you gather their attention and how can you explain it in a very simple way.
Yeah, I think that's why we ended up working with food, because for me, my passion is the environment, but the only way anyone ever cares about that is like if you're talking about things they eat, which everyone loves. So yeah, that's kind of why I ended up working with food.
It's really interesting with cellular agriculture, telling people about it and trying to explain that you're growing meat in the lab, and the first thing they say is like Franken meat, and then you have a picture of like a twitching muscle on the page, and you're like, no, like not like that. But I always do it that like when I try and explain what happens when muscle fibers are grown, I have this massive jumper, and when cells attach to things, they like spread out. When they're not very happy or they're dead or they're floating, they kind of swoop around. Then they attach to things and they spread. And I have this jumper that kind of like looks like wings, and then in cell agriculture we put collagen gel in we cast it in these well plates, and we actually stick in Velcro, and the cells grab onto these Velcro and they go like this. And I always find that that's a good way to explain it. Like if you can visually explain things and like relate it back to something that people know, that always seems to work.
Yeah, how did you kind of find that with twins? Because there are the photographs, but there's a lot of some science behind it.
Yeah, so well, we communicate with our twins on a regular basis, trying to explain the scientific progress that we have, and one of the reasons why is to really incentivise them to continue with the research, and that's often a bit of a trick. But I work in the clinical side, and often if people really understand the clinical motivation behind a piece of research, so for example, I look at ageing research and development of frailty. People are very, everybody's got somebody in their family who is frail, somebody in their family who has dementia, and so it's quite easy to get people interested in relating to that sort of thing, because it's something they experience every day in their life. So
do you ever find that you have to kind of build up a particular relationship with them and work with them as an individual? And
yeah, that's right. So in terms of dealing with participants within our Department of Twin Research, we try very, very hard to really look after these individuals and really make sure that their visits with us are really fulfilling and they are engaged in the science that we're doing. And I mean, in terms of a lot of the work we do is genetic, epigenetic, and so on. So that's quite difficult to explain to people, how that works. So use of analogies. One thing that we're focusing right now on is the microbiome, which is the huge conglomeration of microbes that live with us. In fact, the fact that we're sort of superorganisms, and that's really interesting in people's reaction to that whole side of our science at the minute.
Yeah, you've all got quite different topics that cover very specific fields, but I was wondering, in terms of like working with people in different departments and areas, and not just scientists but communicators, and how you found that experience.
We've loved it, yeah, I guess. So we've worked, especially recently, with a lot of artists, a lot of communicators. So I'm kind of
farmers, isn't it?
Yeah, farmers are the main people we've worked with. So going right back to where food comes from. And what we found is people like farmers are a lot more scientific and creative and engaged than people give them credit for. So we went to a farming conference and we're just amazed at like the number of 6-year-old men with caps on who are like standing up and asking this 20-year-old scientist woman questions about like how worms innovate the soil and stuff like that.
There was a guy next to me tweeting, and he must have been like 70. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
I think that everyone is on a spectrum of like art and science as well. I think we so often put people in boxes. It's like you're an artist, you're a scientist. But I at the moment work with a designer in the lab called Amy Congdon. And she's a scientist. She says she isn't, but she is. She can do tissue engineering better than I
think it's very similar, the way scientists and the way artists think. Okay, they can have different languages, but they have to be both as creative. They have to invent something new. They are challenged by their own new ideas, and sometimes their new ideas are not even accepted by the public. For example, if you have a very, chalky, maybe not in art now things are more acceptable, but maybe 100 years ago, if you show something really shocking, no one will understand you. And it's the same in science. If you come with a very innovative idea that kind of contradicts all the current dogmas, you have to find for it. So I think that sometimes the mindset it's very similar, but the language is different and the way they express it is different. But I really believe that there's a lot of a big relation between a creative scientist mind and a creative artist mind.
I think it's really important at the moment as well for scientists to embrace artists. Like scientists find things out, and often artists, just by the nature of who they are a lot better at portraying that message to the public. And I think it's really important to not be afraid to merge the two fields, because the message is a lot stronger when they're working together rather than
I think that's I was to say one of the problems in science at the moment. It's so pushed for like papers, and you're always doing like analysis, or it's always very scientific. And actually, King's have done some really awesome stuff in kind of trying to promote like communication science, as communicators, as artists. Because at the end of the day, if you've got a choice between giving a talk at an event or getting a paper in, for your career, what are you going to do? Whereas I think that a lot of the people or the scientists that I've encountered, actually, they're doing some really incredible things. Like, they're doing really hard-hitting stuff, but they just, you know, can't get out of the lab to go and, you know, tell people about this. So I think that having science as communicators and, you know, as artists in a certain sense, you need both to work together. You need art and science to work together, and not like put them in separate boxes.
Yeah. But when you write a scientific paper, one of the most important things to focus on is the diagram, is the figures. And actually, you know, the sexiest papers have really amazing figures. People spend a lot of effort sort of getting the figures really visual. I mean, you know, especially in genomic medicine or whatever. You know, so I don't know whether you find that as well. That, you know, a lot of effort goes into the figures in science.
I used to work on fly brains and spent ages getting like really good images.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So from a cellular level to sort of like, you know, systems biology level, sort of getting really good heat maps and things like this. You know, that definitely the visual is really important in science, and getting that message across to the scientists, not just to the public. It entails art.
I was just going to say, it's sad that like not really the general public get to see scientific papers. It's not written in a language that anyone can really understand outside the field. So I think if there was a way of getting, you know, so people could understand more what scientists are doing.
Well, we're supposed to write like a lay summary of your work, and that will go into the news and views of the journal, but it's still very cryptic sometimes.
Yeah, I suppose there are quite utopian ideals that have mixed the two to come together to kind of work towards future. Is it quite hard to get scientists and artists to meet up and just be in that same space?
I think it's becoming more and more frequent thing that happens. Like, say, with a lot of the science writing I've done, a lot of the things I write about are science-artist collaborations, or artists who have become scientists through researching a form of art for so long. Like, a friend of mine at Aspen, Oren Katz, can do the same stuff that Aspen could do, growing meat in the lab, through his pursuit of art, because he saw like growing meat in the lab as an art form, and now he's just an amazing cell biologist. So, I think it's becoming more and more common that scientists and artists work together, and I think scientists and artists are both recognising the benefit they can give to each other.
Yeah, and there's a lot of labs that also have resident artists that come along, spend time with us in the microscope, getting these beautiful pictures under the microscope of this micro world that is not accessible to everybody. Exactly.
On a phone. Maybe on a
So it's more and more you see this kind of all writers that come and write books from, I don't know, I'm just thinking just about a book I read recently where there was a writer that came and spent 6 months in one lab to see how people work, how socially how are the interactions between postdocs and PhD students and PIs, and the stress of publishing an article, or the joy of finding something amazing. And so there's a lot of collaboration, I would say.
Also, there's not just art showcasing science. I'm going to a lab in January, and basically it's the lab of Andrew Pelling in Ottawa, and someone came into the lab one day and they were like, they had an apple and they work on scaffolds for growing cells on. And he had an apple, and apparently they were like, this is a really interesting structure. He's like, I wonder if you could grow cells on it. And so Andrew Pelling, who was the PI there, was just like, let's try it then. So they tried growing cells on an apple. And then it turned out that Andrew Pelling's partner whittles woodwind instruments. So she whittled an ear out of an apple, and then they grew skin scales on it. And now they're using it because cellulose is a known cell scaffold. They're now essentially growing ears on apples. And they're also growing like peripheral nerves in asparagus, which is so interesting because it's like art and science feeding into each other to actually create things, not just one showcase the other.
It's not just that. I'm thinking about this. There's the amazing scientist called Elie Woolman. That was working in Pasteur Institute in Paris. And he discovered something called the sexuality of the bacteria, which means that he managed to see how bacteria exchange genes. And actually, it was thanks to his wife, that was an amazing cook. And actually, one day she was doing something on the blender at home, and he realized that's the good way to break the links between the bacteria and kind of prove that these bacteria are actually with this little pili, with this little connection between them and exchanging genes. So also gastronomy can in a way inspire you to your new experiments, and actually sometimes doing experiments, having a protocol will be like following a recipe, and if you are in some ways innovative, you will be able to do something different that actually would make things work differently. So you just follow protocol, but if you are very creative, if you bring a bit more of imagination into your protocol, into your recipe, maybe you're gonna be able to finally make the experiment work, or you're gonna make a dish that is much nicer than the original one.
I found out cells grow on tofu and corn really well. Just because the structure looked cool and it was vegetarian. So yeah, I'm totally pleased into it.
Speaking of food, before we came out, you mentioned that you kind of help organise a lunch.
Oh yeah, we organise stem cells at lunch. We don't have stem cells for lunch, but we speak.
I'll bring them next time.
We get inspired by other scientists and by other speakers during lunchtime. So with my colleague Davide Danovi, that is sitting over there, we have this series of seminars that happen every other week in King's College, in the Stem Cell Center. And so basically we invite scientists that will speak a bit about their project, but we also invite other speakers that with a completely a bit out of the box topic that could kind of, for example, recently we had an architect that explained us how he was inspired in nature to create the patterns that he used in the cancer center in Guy's Hospital, or a theologist that explains you all the ethics behind the stem cell research. So it's a really nice, if you're interested about stem cells, it's a really nice lunch venue if you'd like to come. And soon we're going to launch another type of lunch, which is called, it's a podcast that actually it's for everybody, for the public, where we will have our stem cells at lunch digested, so that all the public would be able to know a bit what we were discussing about during lunch.
And what are those conversations like between people, kind of on a surface level at lunch?
It's how they like, meaning in terms of what the topic, or so usually there's a researcher that comes or a speaker that comes and kind of introduce a bit their topic, talk a bit their research, their more recent data, and then it's an open discussion. So then it will be open to everybody that would like to ask questions, or it's kind of informal setting, and everybody's welcome to join.
Mainly kind of focusing and looking towards the future and what you could be working on.
Yeah, could be also a good approach. Yeah. Really depends on the speaker, the way things go.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could kind of all give a quick sort of digested version of what is happening in the future in your field at the moment. Starting with you.
Yeah, so over the last sort of 5 years, we've just come to realise that we're not humans at all, and we do have this massive conglomeration of bacterial, archaea, fungi cells within us. So we're really a walking superorganism, and we have our own sort of garden inside ourselves, which we probably have been ignoring for way too long. And so the big challenge is you've just got huge amounts of data on the DNA that exists in these bacteria and archaea within us, and the challenge is how to make sense of it, really, either functionally or sort of taxonomically, to try and understand how differences in the superorganism between us affects our health. And so there's been some really interesting sort of work looking at how microbes might affect development of obesity, which as a clinician is quite revolutionary, because we used to think that input, so how much you eat, adjusted with your output in terms of how much physical exercise, basically if you eat the same amount you should have the same weight, but actually it is true that some of our patients who might eat very little still gain weight, and this might be to do with the microbiome. So There's certainly good evidence in there, but also in my field, we've recently looking at the way that how you age might be affected by the microorganisms that are within you. And there might be a point at which you might be able to change that through interventions. And so we've been very excited and looking at doing interventions with fecal microbiota, so taking microbes from the poo of healthy individuals and putting them into frail individuals to try to reconstitute the microbiome in those frail individuals. And in clinical setting, this is actually taking place already. You may know about C. difficile, the very difficult organism that causes a form of pseudocolitis in people who've taken lots of antibiotics, and they've decimated their natural flora. So, we do use that clinically, and we use it at Guy's and St Thomas's and King's College Hospital, fecal transplantation. And we're very interested in doing this in wider groups. There are trials that have been done in colitis models, but within frailty as well. And we recently got very far on with a grant application that we might be able to get this funded very easily, but the regulatory environment, unfortunately, is not there yet. So, but in the next couple of years, we'll be able to get that all set up so that we'll be able to do that sort of trial. So that's quite a new, novel area.
And I was wondering whether, for example, now we are getting born in more cleaner and cleaner world where everything is super sterilized and the kids cannot walk on the floor, and then all the hands are automatically cleaned, etc. So we are not ingesting we are not the same amount of microbes. So do you think in this extremely sterile world that we are growing in the future, maybe people will have to take like a micro pill so that they would be able to have their reconstruction, or build their own microbiome in their own body, so that then they can, I don't know, be able to be more resistant to some kind of diseases or so?
So we know that the diversity of microbes within populations sort of that are very different from the Western population is far greater, than it is in Western populations. And we know that also in most health states, the diversity of your garden in your gut is very depleted. So the question as to whether or not we can reconstitute it and whether that then makes a health effect is something that is not fully tested. We know from some small-scale studies that if we change probiotics, so going back to food, we change sort of what we eat, which then feeds the garden in a different way, that we can make differences to immunology within the gut and within the body. So yes, I think it will happen.
So as you have a vaccine, maybe you can have a pill with some inoculation of some bacteria, so that then you can kind of populate your body with
the problem is at the moment we don't have, it's not like there's 5 or there's 10 different microbes that work. It's way too complex than that, and we don't really, it's so big, it's quite difficult to sort of cut it down and work out what is the essential minimum.
And depending where you live, you also have diversity.
Yeah. But it's a big exciting area of science, and I think it's really opening doors, opening minds, that the genome isn't just the human genome, it's about the genome of the superorganism that we need to care about.
So potentially in the future, we could all be taking pills to compensate for a sterile environment. Interesting.
Or maybe we're going to change our sterile environment. We certainly know that things like the amount of bleach people use, the amount of cleaning fluids people use, seems to affect the amount of atopy or allergic reactions allergy within their children, for example. So perhaps we don't need to be quite so clean.
And what would you say the future is in stem cell research?
I think we're going quite quick. Well, with the discovery and with the development of the pluripotent stem cells, we kind of open a huge range of possibilities, and a long-term goal would be to be able to use them to do some cellular therapy, regenerate some organs, being able to, I don't know, when you have a problem in your heart, being able to inject other heart stem cells, so that muscle stem cells in your heart, so that you can kind of help regenerating this kind of tissue. So we are, in some kind of diseases, in some kind of cancers, it's already possible to repopulate, for example, your immune system with stem cells that then kind of fight bad cells, and then you can have a brand new set of immune cells. So yeah, I think that will be the most achievable future. And then some of the feedback that I got, so the little message and hopes in that we got from the public was not only cure diseases and cancer and neuronal diseases, but also the search for immortality. So ultimately, maybe some it could be done, but until then, let's just regenerate bit by bit.
Start slowly and then work and see what happens.
Cool. Yeah. I suppose that, so the stem cell link into cellular agriculture, a lot of the features of stem cells sort of the same for growing meat in the lab, because the starting cells are the same. And so induced pluripotent cells are where you have a cell that kind of is already either, you know, a muscle cell or a nerve cell or on the way to going there, and you turn them back into being a pluripotent cell, which can turn into basically anything, right?
She has all the potential to be whatever.
Can do anything, and it can renew, so it can like replicate essentially indefinitely. It can keep going, and that's one of the cell types that can be used to make cultured meat in the lab. But actually the future of cultured meat is sort of a little bit unknown. We're trying to make thicker tissues, which is hasn't been done in regenerative medicine or in cultured meat. It's the same sort of drives, just a different end product. But for food, the future could go one of many
ways. Yeah, I think the key thing that we're trying to change about the future of food is just getting people engaged in it and understanding where food comes from. Because we have this really weird disconnect, which I think comes from like walking into a supermarket and having everything available all times of year, no matter, like, well, in our case, where we live, we have food from all over the world. And that's not really how it ever has been, or really how it should be if we want to be able to eat without exhausting our resources.
And I think that, you know, it goes deeper than that as well. We want people to know where their food comes from, but when you walk into a shop, what do you choose? You know, how do you buy into a better system? And so Future Farm Lab, we're doing projects where we look at the system. So our newest project is where we're looking at people buying into or investing in a field of cereals, a field of grain. So you share the risk with the farmer, so he can farm differently, because actually 95% of farmers don't farm organically. So we're buying from like Farm Drop or Riverford, which is great. They're really good starting points, but what about the 95% of farmers that don't farm organically? You know, how do we support them and steer them towards better practices? So this buying into a field of grain is where they can try different practices and they can try new grains and things that they wouldn't usually, and then you share that risk, but also you have that connection. You have discussions with the farmer and as a group, and you decide where the grain grows, where the grain goes, how it's milled, what, you know, you impact economic markets, because at the end you decide where it's going to be sold to. You decide if you have pesticides or not. Like, so it's getting people
people properly invested, not just in the monetary sense of the word, but in the sense where they can almost be the farmer. They will help the farmer decide and have a roundtable discussion about what pesticides or what fertilizers they're going to put on, if any. And that will make people understand the really hard decisions that farmers have to make day to day in order to keep providing us with the food that we really do take for granted quite a lot of the time.
I think if we take anything away from this, it's like everyone in this room is part of the food system, and we can all make changes. Like, you've got to believe that you might feel like one person, but actually collectively we can make a change to the food system.
Great. I was wondering if there are any questions from the audience.
So I was thinking when you were talking about the problems of having monoculture and how we can try to do that and how sustainable it farm. But I was under the impression that a lot of the pressure comes also to efficiency and keeping large number of people, and we have an increasing number of business in our planet
think that's a narrative we're fed, is this whole feed the world narrative, that we need to produce and continue to produce more food to feed. I think the projection is 10 billion by 2050. Well, currently we have enough food to feed 14 billion, but we just don't distribute it well. Even the fact that you can grow foods, like we all say about vertically farming, I don't know if you've heard of that phrase, like, so you farm fields, but there's a farmer who plants apple trees in his field, so you can grow on 2 levels. We do need to stop feeding grain to animals. That's a massive one. We need to feed diverse, like well-grown grain to people and stop feeding the animals. So that does mean we have to decrease the amount of meat we eat too. Yeah. But we have enough room now. We honestly do.
I think if we all continue to eat in the way we eat now, having, like, some people will eat meat 3 times a day, then it might reach a point where we can't produce enough food if we're not farming at a mass scale. But if we each make individual changes where we eat meat maybe once a week, then that model becomes... Yeah, definitely, but the amount that we eat is like...
The insect itself, for us that are not used to it will be a bit weird to have it like, I don't know, a dish of cornflakes, but instead of cornflakes you have crickets or whatever. That would be really weird, but if you ground it and then if you have like a flower of insect, could be extremely nutritious, and then being able to, and you can use it, I don't know, put it in your soup or put it, and you don't see the animal, and so I think it will be much more appealing to eyes, because at the end you also need to seduce your eyes when you're making food. So
also there's a big change of like consumer perceptions of things. There's a really cool restaurant in Brighton called Silo, and blood is a staple on the menu, seaweed is a staple on the menu. They use like all parts of the animal and stuff like that. So it's changing the way we view food, and even, you know, insects is like this weird thing. It seems to just be in our country more than anywhere. But there's even a thing we found the other day, I found out about the other day, it's called sea buckthorn, and basically it's got 6 times more vitamin C than an orange. You can grow it in the UK, it fruits for 8 months a year, and it's just like, I've never heard of it. I've never heard of it. And so we get like fixated on like specific foods and stuff like that, and then we go to a supermarket where we have the choice of everything. So it's this weird kind of relationship with diversity as well. So it is consumer acceptances, I think, too.
Also might come down to education also, because people don't know how to cook all the parts of the animal, whereas in other countries they do, because they're like about or and people have to sort of
Yeah, totally right.
Great, I think that's a fantastic point to finish on. I'd like to thank everyone for coming along, and yeah, thank you to the audience.